Happy weekend, everybody. How's everybody doing out there in TV land? Well, here in the YouTube spaceship, Doc is going to talk to you about a couple of issues of Amazing Spider-Man, in particular 167 through 169. So let's go ahead and dig into it. All right, so we start off with 167, which is one of the books that I picked up the other day. And this is the first appearance of Will O The Wisp, who starts out as a villain, but then you come to find out that he's got a sympathetic backstory about why he is who he is and how he came to be. This was written by Len Wein with art by Ross Andru with inks by Mike Esposito, and it's part 1 of 2, but I happened to pick up 3 issues in a row, so I wanted to talk about all of them in one fell swoop. So you have a new Spider Slayer with J. Jonah Jameson's ugly mug on there, and then you have the introduction of the Will O The Wisp. So this issue shows Jonah having built another Spider Slayer, not learning his lesson in issue 25 way back in the day, nor in issue 58 about 10 years previous. But instead he goes after the web slinger again. His soon-to-be wife is the doctor that is helping him build this wondrous contraption, I guess you would call it, to try to catch Spider-Man. Meanwhile, Will O The Wisp is going around running people off the road, trying to break into different locations, and you don't really know why. He seems like a sympathetic character in the beginning because he's speaking about somebody pretty much pulling his strings, but you don't know who that is. Well, you'll find out in the next issue who it is, but for right now, just know that Will O The Wisp is so much more than meets the eye. He is not a bad guy. He is merely trying to physically pull himself back together. He was in an accident that caused his molecular structure to break down, and now he can't keep himself together except through force of will. Kind of like Green Lantern with his constructs. But that's the only way that Will can keep himself together. So there's a villain, a true villain, in all of this that has promised to help him, but he's got to help the villain by stealing some papers and doing dastardly, nasty things for this guy. So that is pretty much the gist of this first issue. Now, I'll say Ross Andru was on the title for a long time, and I don't have a whole lot of these issues where he was the main artist. But he was consistent, if nothing else. I mean, he was a great artist. Don't get me wrong. I'm not knocking him. But I'm just saying, he was consistent. He was on all 3 of these issues that I picked up the other day. And from what I remember, I think he only missed 3 issues total from like 125 all the way through the 180s when he relinquished the title over to, I think it was Keith Pollard. But anyway, so that's an exciting first issue. We've got an old villain, a new villain, a conundrum about why this new villain is who he is and why he is. And then we pick up with issue 168, also by the same creative team, and you find out who the true villain in this story is. And it is Dr. Jonas Harrow. And Jonas Harrow has got it out for Spidey, so he sends Will after him, and he says, that's the only way that I'm going to help you, is if you go ahead and kill Spider-Man. That's the only way that I'm going to be able to help you out. And so Will is torn. He says, I don't want to do this. But he has a machine. Dr. Harrow has a machine that he can pretty much push a button or turn a dial, and it will hurt because it's trying to separate this character of Will O The Wisp. And so he's pretty much stuck doing what this evil, dastardly villain wants him to do, or else he'll be scattered to the 4 winds and unable to keep himself JJJ is still chasing him with the Spider Slayer in this issue, but gets embarrassed once again. Marla continues to help JJJ rebuild the Spider Slayer. And at the end of the day, we get a strange end for Will. And then Dr. Harrow gets away without Spider-Man seeing him or knowing who he is, because he was just standing in the crowd wearing a trench coat and a top hat. And I mean, not a top hat, but just a hat. And, he successfully managed to get away from that crowd before Spidey recognized who he was, and so he could cause more trouble. It's really an interesting character study that we have here, because you don't know that much about this character, but they want you to empathize with him regardless. He's introduced in kind of a whirlwind 2-issue situation, and wouldn't be seen again for almost another 100 issues in ASM until John Romita Jr. was on the title. So these 2 books, very solid. The artwork's solid. Len Wein was a good scripter for this book. So if you haven't had a chance to read this, both of these books were a little bit on the pricey side originally. I don't know that they're doing anything as far as speculation with Will O The Wisp, but maybe they are. Maybe they are. But either way, 2 good solid issues of ASM, which is followed up by issue 169. And here we have JJJ showing Peter Parker some pictures, that prove that Peter is Spider-Man. And in the issue, Peter gets to the envelope that J. Jonah Jameson has the photos in first, sees what they are, and then manages to print some other photos to show, hey, these photos that you have are photoshopped, they're duplicated, they're not real. And then JJJ comes along and says, well, hey, since you're the only one that has the original prints, then, how do I know that you didn't do anything to monkey with this? And there really wasn't any way for Peter to get out of it unless he fingered somebody else as the culprit for this. So he pointed the finger at Harry Osborn and said, hey, Harry, turned into the Goblin a while back. He wanted to get back at me for, being frustrated with me about his dad being gone. Of course, nobody knows that Peter is Spider-Man, that he did have something to do with the death of Norman Osborn, or the supposed death of Norman Osborn. But, Harry had it out for him because Harry had figured out who he was and what part he had played in his father's death. So, at the end of the day, he does manage to throw JJJ off the trail by sending him after Harry Osborn. And then we get this character named Bart Hamilton, who is a psychiatrist. And apparently Harry has been seeing Dr. Hamilton after his breakdown earlier in the series. And I'm not going to say what happens in case you haven't read this book, but I've also got issue 178, and that begins a 3-parter that deals more with the Green Goblin and with Bart Hamilton and Peter and Harry. So, really strong little trio, and I'm going to count them as a trio because it continues the story from issue to issue to issue. But like I said, strong trio that we've got here by Len Wein, Ross Andru, and Mike Esposito. So, thanks for joining me on here. I love ASM. It's one of my favorite titles. It is my favorite title. I read the title through the recent Zeb Wells stuff, and mainly, a lot of people have said Romita Jr. has lost his step. I see that there's not as much experimentation on his part as there has been before, but I was thinking it over the other day, and I said to myself, if you have a crappy story, or if you have a story that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, then you have to do the best that you can to draw what you don't understand. So I'm not laying everything at Zeb Wells' feet, but if you've got a crappy story and then you give it to a good artist, they can only make so much out of the crap that you give them. So let's be happy. Let's continue to let JR stay on ASM for a little bit longer, because like I was telling somebody at my local comic shop the other day, once he's gone, then I don't think he'll ever step on Spidey for a long run again. So I'm happy to have him, even though he's not 100% of what he was back in the mid-90s when he came back to Spider-Man. But, you know, hey, I'll take it. But anyway, enough about that. Thanks again for watching. And pop in the comments below and let me know what your favorite issue of ASM was or is. Is it the current run? Is it the 8 Deaths of Spider-Man? Is it these Nobody Can Stop the Juggernaut books that Romita Jr. worked on back in the 80s? Is it the first issue of Amazing Fantasy? What's your favorite Spider-Man title? Let me know down in the comments below, and we will catch up in another video here in a few days. Take care, guys. Have a great weekend.